Picture yourself as a 12-year-old girl, standing in a cavernous hall, the air heavy with the scent of wax and wine. Your dress is stiff, embroidered with gold that weighs you down. And the adults around you are whispering words you don't fully grasp. Alliance, inheritance, contract. Tomorrow you'll be married to a man you've barely met, someone old enough to be your father. Your parents' smiles aren't for you. They're for the deal they've just secured, a transaction where you're the currency. This isn't a scene from a grim fairy tale. It's the Middle Ages, a world where marriage wasn't about love or choice, but about power and survival. Let's step into this reality together, not as distant observers, but as witnesses to a system so brutal it makes modern heartbreaks look like child's play. We'll walk through the lives of girls sold into wedlock, women who gambled with death in childbirth, and families crushed by the cost of a bride. By the end, you'll see why medieval marriage was less a vow and more a sentence, its echoes still shaping how we think about love and power. Let's start with Margaret Beaufort, a girl of 6 in 1449, standing in a room where every adult sees her as a prize, not a person. Her guardians, hungry for her vast inheritance, marry her to John de la Pole, a boy barely older than she is. She doesn't understand the priest's droning words or the heavy parchment signed in her name. It's all a strange ritual, like a game gone wrong. But to the men around her, it's a calculated move in a high-stakes game of land and lineage. Margaret's story isn't a rare horror. It's a glimpse into a world where children, especially daughters, were pawns in a relentless pursuit of wealth. In medieval Europe, marriage was a contract, and the younger the bride, the better the deal, because a child couldn't resist, couldn't question, and her future fertility was a commodity to be locked in early. You might flinch at the thought of a 6-year-old bride, but this was no scandal in the noble houses of the Middle Ages. The Church, the arbiter of marriage, set the age of consent at 7 for both girls and boys, though consummation was meant to wait until puberty, around 12 for girls, 14 for boys. But when power or money was at stake, those rules bent like reeds in a storm. Take Isabella of Valois, daughter of the French king, married in 1396 to Richard II of England. She was 6 years and 5 days old, her dowry packed with her childhood dolls and tiny silver furniture, as if to remind everyone she was still a child. The contract delayed consummation until she was 12, a small mercy in a world that saw her as a political tool, not a person. These weren't love stories gone awry. They were cold, calculated deals, binding families and fortunes together. Were these parents heartless, you might ask? Did they not care for their daughters? It's easy to judge, but the truth is thornier. Medieval parents weren't monsters. They were trapped in a system where survival demanded ruthless choices. A daughter with land or titles was a golden ticket, but that ticket came with risks. Wars could burn down estates, plagues could wipe out heirs, and political betrayals could ruin a family overnight. Marrying a child early secured alliances and wealth before fate could snatch them away. For the elite, marriage was a marketplace, and daughters were the currency. Peasants, thankfully, had less to barter. Most married in their late teens or early 20s. Their unions built on shared labor rather than dynastic dreams. But for girls like Margaret and Isabella, childhood was a luxury they couldn't afford. Let's stay with Margaret a moment longer. By 9, her first marriage was annulled when political winds shifted, and she was sold again, this time to Edmund Tudor, a 24-year-old with royal ambitions. At 12, she stood beside him as his wife, and Edmund, ignoring the custom to wait until she was 14, consummated the marriage. Within months, She was pregnant. Picture that, a 12-year-old girl, her body barely her own, carrying a child in a world where childbirth could be a death sentence. Her son, Henry Tudor, would one day birth a dynasty, but at what cost to her? As we follow her story, we'll see that the wedding was just the beginning, a gateway to a night that would strip away her privacy, and a life that would test her survival. The hall fades, the voice is quiet, and now we're moving toward that next moment, the wedding night, where the real spectacle begins. The feast is over, the tables littered with scraps of bread and bone. Laughter echoes, but it's not for you. You're led through the crowd, your heart pounding, as friends, family, even curious strangers trail behind. This is no private retreat to your new life as a wife. It's the bedding ceremony, a medieval tradition that turns your most intimate moment into a public performance. Imagine being Margaret of York in 1468, wed to Charles the Bold of Burgundy, to seal an alliance with England. Noble women guide you to the chamber, their hands deft as they untie your gown, comb your hair, and whisper advice. Some gentle, some laced with crude jests. Across the hall, men do the same for your groom, their laughter louder, their words bolder. You're placed in bed, the curtains drawn, but the crowd doesn't leave. They linger, waiting to ensure the marriage is sealed, the alliance cemented. This wasn't just a quirky custom. It was a legal necessity for high-stakes unions. Consummation made the marriage binding, locking in inheritance rights and political deals. Without it, the contract could unravel, alliances could collapse. For Margaret of York, chroniclers recorded every detail. The priest blessing the bed for fertility, the stockings thrown at the couple for luck, a strange game where a direct hit meant the thrower would marry next. The pressure was crushing. A failed consummation could mean diplomatic ruin. For child brides like Isabella of Valois, the ceremony was even more jarring. At 6, she endured this ritual, her doll still in hand, a public reminder that her childhood was over, even if consummation was delayed. The witnesses weren't there to celebrate, they were there to verify, to ensure the transaction was complete. This wasn't every wedding, mind you. Commoners had simpler ceremonies, often just vows at the church door and a quiet night. The bedding ritual was an elite tradition, its invasiveness tied to the wealth and power at stake. Even among nobles it varied. In Scandinavia, public bedding was sometimes legally required to validate the marriage. Elsewhere, it was symbolic, with guests leaving after escorting the couple. By the early modern period, some like Charles I of England pushed back, barring their doors to keep the crowd out. But in the Middle Ages, privacy was a rare privilege, especially for a bride. Think about what this meant for her. The bedding ceremony wasn't just humiliating, it was a public stripping of autonomy. Your body was on display, your worth tied to what happened in that bed. For grooms, the pressure was different. Failure to perform could spark ridicule or legal challenges. The priest's blessing felt less like a prayer and more like a command. For young brides, the knowledge that this was a rehearsal for what awaited years later was a heavy shadow. Some couples, despite the spectacle, found moments of connection. Others remained strangers, their marriage a duty, not a bond. But for the bride, the stakes were always higher. A single night could define her value, her future, her survival. Now the curtains close, the crowd disperses, but the weight doesn't lift. You're a wife now, and what comes next is no easier. The marriage bed was just the beginning. Ahead lies a new trial, one where your body faces not just scrutiny but mortal danger. Let's step into the birthing chamber, where the true cost of medieval marriage is paid in blood. You're lying in a cold stone room, the air thick with the scent of herbs and fear. You're 16, maybe younger, like Margaret Beaufort at 13, and labor pains grip you like a vice. Midwives hover, their faces tense, while a priest murmurs prayers outside, not just for your child, but for you. This isn't a moment of joy, it's a gamble with death. In the Middle Ages, childbirth wasn't a miracle to celebrate. It was a battlefield, and every pregnancy was a roll of the dice. For noble women, especially young brides, marriage meant risking their lives again and again, their bodies pushed to breaking before they were fully grown. Let's return to Margaret Beaufort. Pregnant at 12 by Edmund Tudor, she faced a labor so brutal it nearly killed her. Her confessor, John Fisher, called her survival a miracle, her small frame barely able to birth her son, Henry Tudor. He lived, but the cost was permanent. She never bore another child, her body scarred at 13. This wasn't rare, it was the grim norm. We don't have precise numbers, but roughly 1 in 3 women died in childbirth or from complications like infection or hemorrhage. Today, maternal mortality is a fraction of a percent in most developed nations. In the Middle Ages, it was deadlier than any modern extreme sport. Why was it so perilous? Medieval medicine was a patchwork of superstition and harm. Midwives might bleed you during labor, thinking it balanced your humors when you were already losing blood. Birthing chairs meant to speed delivery, often tore fragile tissues. Herbal concoctions and prayers were the best care available, even for queens like Isabella of Aragon, who died at 18 after days of agonizing labor. Wealth didn't spare her, it only drew out her suffering. Noble women faced relentless pressure to produce heirs, their worth tied to their wombs. Eleanor of Aquitaine endured 10 pregnancies, a towering figure who survived what many didn't. Most noble women faced 8 to 15, each a potential death sentence. Picture the toll. Young brides, often pregnant before their pelvises were fully formed, risked obstructed labor, where the baby couldn't emerge. Even older teens faced gruesome odds. No anesthesia, no sterile tools, no understanding of sepsis. Survivors often carried injuries, prolapsed organs, torn muscles, chronic pain that haunted them for life. For many, like Margaret, one birth ended their fertility, their value as wives diminished in a world obsessed with heirs. The psychological weight was crushing, knowing each pregnancy could kill you, yet being expected to conceive year after year. Infertility was blamed on women, though we now know male factors cause half of conception issues. A barren wife was a failure, her status fragile, her body breaking under the strain. Childbirth wasn't just a personal ordeal. It was a societal engine, grinding women down to keep dynasties alive. Peasants faced similar risks but married later, with fewer children, their lives shaped by labor rather than lineage. For noble women, the birthing chamber was a battlefield, and they were conscripted as children. As the midwives' voices fade, you realize surviving this is only half the battle. Ahead lies a life with a husband who holds absolute power over your body, your freedom, your life. You survived the birthing chamber, perhaps scarred but breathing, and now you're a wife in every sense. But don't expect rest. Medieval marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a hierarchy, and you're at the bottom. Your husband can beat you, imprison you, even kill you, all within the law's blessing. The church preaches your submission. The courts uphold his rights, and society watches in silence. Let's walk through this chilling reality where survival hinges on his mercy, or your cunning. The law was clear. A married woman had no identity separate from her husband. She couldn't own property, sign contracts, or testify in court without his consent. The doctrine of reasonable chastisement allowed him to discipline her physically, as long as it wasn't excessive, a term so vague it invited abuse. Court records show men acquitted for beating their wives with sticks, provided the stick was no thicker than a thumb. This wasn't seen as cruelty, it was a husband's prerogative. At the extreme, consider Henry VIII, who wielded these laws like a blade. When Anne Boleyn failed to produce a male heir, he charged her with adultery, incest, and treason. Accusations so flimsy even his allies balked. Adultery by a queen was treason, threatening the royal succession, and the penalty was death. Anne was beheaded in 1536, her trial a legal farce. Catherine Howard, barely 19, met the same fate for alleged infidelity. Henry wasn't an outlier, he was the system's pinnacle. Eleanor Cobham, Duchess of Gloucester, was tortured and imprisoned in the 1440s, her husband complicit because she was politically inconvenient. Accusations of witchcraft or treason were weapons against unwanted wives, needing little evidence. Divorce was a mirage. The church allowed annulments only for invalid marriages, often requiring humiliating public exams to prove non-consummation. For most women, escape was impossible. Fleeing meant destitution. Convents were a last resort, not a choice. Some, like Margaret Beaufort, navigated this trap, choosing later husbands strategically to gain influence. But most endured, their resilience a quiet rebellion against a system that saw them as property. This wasn't just personal cruelty, it was structural oppression. Marriage laws kept wealth and power in male hands. A wife's dowry, an inheritance swallowed by her husband. Even widows faced ruin, their husband's property passing to male heirs. Many remarried quickly, not for love but for survival. The church sanctified this, preaching wifely obedience while ignoring the screams. As we step forward, we see the final piece of this machine. The economics that drove it, where dowries bankrupted families and women were both commodity and currency. Marriage was a transaction, and the price was staggering. Let's walk through this world of dowries and inheritance, where a bride's worth could ruin her family and her life. Picture the dowry, the fortune a bride's family paid to marry her off. Not a gift, but a ransom, sometimes worth $500,000 today. Isabella of Castile's marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon was a diplomatic triumph, but its negotiations lasted years. Her dowry, a king's ransom of cash, land, and jewels. Her family wasn't just buying a husband. They were purchasing status, protection, a stake in a dynasty. The cost could bankrupt families, some plunging into debt for generations to afford a single daughter's match. For the bride, the dowry was a chain. Everything her family sacrificed became her husband's property the moment she wed. She went from her father's asset to her husband's, carrying her own purchase price. Widowhood offered no relief. Inheritance laws favored male heirs, often leaving widows destitute. Many remarried swiftly, hoping the next husband wouldn't die and leave them penniless. The system was predatory. Families faced a brutal choice: pay a crushing dowry or leave a daughter unmarried. A social and financial death sentence. The groom's family saw the bride as an investment, her dowry and connections a ladder to power. She was both product and payment, her worth measured in gold, not heart. The fallout was devastating. Dowries ruined families, and even after paying, there was no guarantee of a bride's safety. Once married, she was her husband's property, her family powerless against abuse. Serial marriages were Sulla, driven by necessity, were common. Widows and widowers remarried within months, a grim cycle of survival. The Black Death, which killed a third of Europe, turned marriage into a revolving door, with death resetting the game. Yet some women, like Margaret Beaufort, gamed a system, amassing wealth through strategic remarriages. Most weren't so fortunate, trapped in a cycle of loss and remarriage. This wasn't love. It was commerce, sanctified by the church, enforced by law. The final cruelty? Marriages rarely lasted long. Death, from childbirth, plague or war, ended most within 15 to 20 years. Till death do us part was no vow, it was a grim reality. This world of child brides, public humiliations, deadly births, and legal oppression was a machine that crushed lives for survival's sake. Yet, amidst the horror, women like Margaret and Eleanor of Aquitaine endured, their resilience a testament to human strength. Today we swipe left to avoid heartbreak. They faced death to secure a future. Their stories remind us, our choices, flawed as they are a victory over a past where love was a luxury and marriage a battlefield. If this journey through medieval marriage has left you stunned or grateful for modern love, drop a comment and share your thoughts. What shocked you most? Subscribe for more dives into history's hidden corners, and hit the bell to never miss a tale. Let's keep exploring the past together.